Hi everyone, my name is Laurent SAVAETE. I'm one of the co-founders of Madada. I'm going to stand here, it might be easier. We're a platform based in France doing access to information, freedom of information, and I'll tell you a bit more about what this is. And I'll try to show you, because I'm assuming a lot of people here are coming sort of from a business angle, how something that is fundamentally a human right could be used for improving funding to open source software. When I'm saying this, I'm not thinking of grants, but I'm actually thinking of public procurement and how essentially it is possible to go and sell your products, your services to the state in a very broad understanding of it. And yeah, so I'm going to focus on that and give you a little bit of civic education. And because everybody's been talking about AI in the future and so on, I'm going to focus on old things for now, something called democracy. So access to information, also known as freedom of information, FOI, FOIA, access to documents. There's a ton of different names for all these things, but essentially they all boil down to the same concept that you as a person, as a company, as an civil society organization can ask the state, the government, the local city council, whatever, a question and maybe get an answer. So this maybe here is a little bit of my French bias in things, whereby we tend to have a lot of questions and very few answers. That's the typical French answer. It's just I don't want to know, I don't want to tell you. But other countries are a lot more functional from that perspective. I like to talk about access to information as some sort of a debugger for government. So if you think of open data as the print statement of your government, the government saying, this is what we're doing, this is what I'm doing, but I choose to display this information. There are things that are at the edge of open data, and when you don't have what you want, you can use the debugger and kind of go and query the memory and so on. And this is what access to information is. A bit of history. The modern concept of FOI was probably born in Sweden in 1766. Är det svensk? Bra. Sorry, I was born in Sweden. That was a little personal thing. But then about 20 years later, the French were hang on, we need this as well. So they created this thing called the Declaration of Human Rights. Well, it was men's rights at the time, because, you know. And it took then about 200 years until this was actually turned into a proper law in 1978, something called the CADA laws, which essentially codify how you can ask the state for information, obtain information, and so on. The French law, so this is French focused, but the French law was updated in 2015, 2016 to take into account things like the internet and computers and digital documents and so on. And it gained constitutional value in 2020, which I think is very important, because this means access to information is a fundamental right. It was recognized by the highest court in France as such, and this basically boils down to this Declaration of Human Rights, Article 15, that essentially says any person can ask the state for information, and that's the fundamental tenet of accountability. We have ATI laws all around the world, so this is a map done by one of our partner organizations. The QR codes, there's a few of them on the slides. They point to the source or some related document. There's no trackers in them, so feel free to use them. So this map shows the quality or assessed quality of the laws around the world. You can see that a lot of European countries are not doing great. Red is obviously bad. Take this with a grain of salt, because at the moment the best country for access to information is Afghanistan. I'll let you, ponder that. Hurdles. So we're French, we're called Madada, which is basically my little horse. We like puns. There's hurdles all along the process of FOI. Initially, you have to start with a request. You have to write that in a certain way. You have to know what to ask. You have to know where to send your request. You have to know how to write things. there's strict timelines that start ticking as soon as you send your request for like how long the government has to respond to you. So all these things, they vary country to country and jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But the gist of it is the same and is kind of common across most of Europe and probably a little bit beyond that. You can appeal decisions or lack of decisions when you don't get what you want. And of course, ultimately, you can go to court and fight for your rights, essentially. In some places, there's even a cost attached to FOI requests. So in the US, for instance, as soon as you ask a question that is beyond like trivial, the first thing you do is send you a quotation for you to obtain the information you want. In France, it's entirely free with like some minor exceptions around, I think, mapping information. But anyway, my point is there are hurdles, and what we do at Madada and with Alaveteli is try to lower these barriers. So we maintain a database of public contacts so that if you want to ask the city of Châtillon, where we are now, about, I don't know, the contracting for their waste collection system, you don't need to go like figure out who the person is. We have that information. We maintain request templates, so it's like old school, you know, a pre-written email, and you can just fit in like the types of information you're looking for. And then to help with the timeline, we have reminders of all sorts when like deadlines are approaching, so that you don't miss those, and so that you don't have to like go back to the beginning of the process and ask for information again. We integrate appeals, which are not particularly difficult per se, but they're just another tedious piece of paperwork. So we make that 3 clicks. You just put in your address and off you go. And the other thing that is interesting is that we publish responses. So when you get documents back or information back, we make this public. And so over time, we are building a corpus of open data, open documents that AI bots love crawling over and over and over. But this means that there is a lot of information that is out there that people don't need to go and ask again. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so this screen does not seem to like maps again. Well, you know what this is. This is basically the Alaveteli platform, our software, around the world. So there's a big EU-wide platform and some national ones in the EU, Australia, New Zealand, a couple of countries in Latin America. I think there's some German people in the room. You probably know Fragdenstadt, which exists in Germany and in Austria. They share a open source software as well, which is different from ours. There's a platform in the US which is open source as well, but is yet another piece of software. And then we have 2 countries, Mexico and Brazil, where the state itself has actually decided to take it upon themselves to run not the open source platform, their own thing. But that kind of says a lot to me about how the importance they attach to transparency. So how is this useful in the context of business, open source, and so on? Basically, I believe you can use these rights. I know you can use these rights for assessing the competition around you, for understanding what competitors are doing, how much they're selling their thing for, what is it they're selling, who is, you know, the contractor for such and such service. And you can basically do this for obviously any software services or interaction, but the same is true of pretty much any service that is sold to public services. So the types of documents, I'm going to show a few examples very soon. But the types of documents that you can request from the public service is essentially the definition, and this is going to be the French definition, but I believe it's quite similar across different countries. In France, the definition is any document that is received, produced, or stored by the state is essentially public, with exceptions. And then the list of exceptions, because we're in France, is like, all the way to the border of Belgium. But so the gist of it are like personal data, so GDPR things, medical information, national security, defense, those kinds of things, they cannot come out. And increasingly so, commercial business secrecy is a growing concern when you look at it from the perspective of transparency. But yes, you can obtain the contracts between a private company and the state. So, obvious example, Microsoft is selling some kind of, Microsoft 365 service to whatever public entity. You, in theory, can obtain the contract between them and the state to understand what the terms of the contract are, what the timeline of the contract is, the price. Potentially, you could get specifications for a tender when the city requested bids and so on. But you can also obtain things like source code and so on. So, case in point, an example of, in France we have a service called Légifrance, which is a website that you can go and check out now, which shows the entire legal corpus of the laws that are applicable today, but also back in time for the French country. And somebody was interested in obtaining the source code for that service. So they went on the left side here. You can see the request that they made on our website, and this was somewhere in October 2025. And they basically said, the gist of it is, can I obtain the source code for this website? About a month passed, and they actually did get a response from the Prime Minister in France, which is fairly unusual. And they said, okay, it's out there on GitHub. You can go and figure that out. Same thing, the QR code links to that request if you want to see it in more detail. And here's the said repository. So you can see the people who coded this are super good because they did everything in one commit. One person did the whole thing, and apparently they like Java. What you can learn from this is obviously their open source strategy is not completely in place yet. The README is particularly illuminating. But my point is, you could do this with basically any software that is run by the state. People have obtained the source code for calculating your tax return and so on. There's plenty of examples. Another one here. Somebody was interested in the source code that was used in an COVID app that was used to understand if people had been vaccinated and so on. So they went and requested the part of the source code that was used to read the barcode that you have at the bottom of your passport files, of your passport or ID cards. So same thing, the request went out. They received a response saying, the code it's open source, it's on GitHub. Here you go. But what is interesting there is that if you look on the far right side, this is AGPL licensed, and this is integrated into some closed source application. I'll let you think about what that means. So there's probably a follow-up request to be made here to ask about what about the rest of the source code? But at least this part is open source. Another one from our German neighbors. This is a request that was made. This one is old, it's from 2014, but I thought it was interesting. Somebody who was actually a speaker here today, but I'm not going to disclose their name, somebody requested the tenders that were provided by Microsoft in 20, blah, 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 sorry, early 2010s to the city of Dortmund. And so they obtained, on the right side, the different documents that were sent at different periods of time. I think those are in German. But my point here is that you are able to obtain this information, which would be considered, confidential information between a city and a private contractor. And so if you are trying to go against Microsoft to sell, I don't know, XWiki or some other products that we have heard today, this can be a gold mine of information for you to understand like what you're up against. This obviously works in Germany, but it does work in France as well, in the UK and many other countries around the EU. And I think this is it for me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this sparked some questions and ideas. I'll be around. Feel free to come and have a chat. You can find us at contact@metadata.fr. And yeah, good luck with your investigations.